Until you guys said it. That's not what you guys said either. And you didn't tell me about the barricades. So screw you. That was duplicitous.
Trying to block us from getting here? That's not okay.
How'd you get? How'd you get?
Today, we are honored to have with us special guest Randy Hillier. Randy Hillier was the first member of provincial parliament to publicly oppose the Canadian government's response to COVID beginning on March 26, 2020. Served 15 years as a member of provincial parliament. Randy Hillier spoke at the International Crisis Summit in Washington last week on February 23rd, and also at the U.S. Senate Committee with the theme, What Did They Hide?, chaired by Senator Ron Johnson.
Next presenter is Mr. Randy Hillier. Mr. Hillier served in the Canadian Parliament for 15 years and was the first member to publicly oppose his government's response to COVID. Probably didn't go well, did it? He is being threatened with a 3.5-year prison term for his support of the Canadian truckers. Mr. Hillier.
Senator, today we're under and democracy is under the bright lights here in this room for all to see, and thank you. But there is a much more to government that is not under the bright lights. There is a dark side to all governments.
Many Canadian truckers were there. Also, Pastor Hillebrand, Christine Anderson, Dr. Robert Malone, Ed Dow, Del Bigtree, and many others. Randy has 26 charges related to COVID mandate offenses for hosting anti-lockdown rallies, 20 of which were dropped. He also has 9 criminal charges for assaulting a police officer and obstruction. He is facing a possible 3.5-year prison sentence for his support of the Canadian truckers.
Okay, so today we are privileged to have Randy Hillier here, all the way from Lanark, Ontario. Far, far away. I think everybody in the freedom movement knows who Randy is. He was just in Washington last week at the International Crisis Summit, and there was quite a few truckers there. I think Ed Cornell was there. Or is that right? Yeah, Ed, and a few others.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. And
Sure.
I'll say, yes, we had a wonderful crowd at the International Crisis Summit. And for people who aren't aware, that the first 4 of those summits were called the International COVID Summit.
Mm-hmm.
It has been changed to the Crisis Summit because, indeed, anybody who is awake realizes that we've got far greater dangers coming at us now than the danger that we just have passed through with COVID. Our path towards authoritarianism is increasing exponentially. But we had a great contingent of Canadians at the Crisis Summit in Washington. Eddie Cornell, Harold Yonkers, Boom Truck Ben, Saba, and many others.
Pastor Hildebrand was there too, I think.
Pastor Hildebrand was there.
Christine Anderson, not Canadian, but an honorary Canadian.
Yeah, no, we had a big selection of European parliamentarians, from Mexico, from around the world. Quite a crowd to be in Washington last week.
Right, and this is the 5th of this series of summits, not the first one. The other 4 were in Europe, correct?
Yeah, in Italy, in the parliaments of Italy, France, Romania, and the European Parliament in Brussels.
Amazing. And this was started by a Canadian couple.
A Canadian lady and her cousin who lives in Italy.
Yes. So you were the first member of Parliament, I think, anywhere in Canada that was opposing the mandates and the government's response to COVID way back in March 2020.
Yeah, I was certainly the first one in Canada. It was a pretty lonely time at that. The first time I spoke out publicly was the first opportunity I had, and that was March 26 in the legislature, where I warned about the lockdowns and the harm that they were causing, and also that we no longer needed to be in a state of emergency. There was still my complete views and ideas on the pandemic were still in its infancy, and there wasn't a lot of evidence available at that time, other than the fact that it was overwhelming that what we were doing was causing far greater harm than it was good, and that was obvious to anybody who wanted to look.
Right. Who was willing to take a look and get past the media narrative.
Yeah. It's and as an elected representative, and I'm a rural representative, so it's a little bit different. Here, everybody knows where I live. I'm in the phone book. People drop in to see me. They phone me. It's I'm a pretty accessible individual. So my phone was lit up, all day long, every day, of constituents, people who were beside themselves, were full of anxiety riddled and full of fear and not knowing what was going to happen to their homes, their businesses, their children, and that isolation and that unknown factor was just driving fear to heights I've never seen before.
It was a very fearful, paranoid time, that's for sure. And at the there was two events there. There was a Senate committee and also the summit. So you spoke at both, and chaired by Ron Johnson, who's a senator, American senator. The theme was intriguing. What did they hide?
Yeah, well, and the initial part of that is the COVID cartel. He framed it up as the COVID cartel. What did they hide? And Senator Johnson is also chair of the Senate Investigations Committee as well. So we're expecting ever more to come out of this. And but it was he assembled 22 individuals who spoke at the crisis summit. Everybody was invited to provide their presentations, and Ron Johnson selected 22 individuals to speak at the Senate, and I was fortunate to be one of those. It covered the gamut, the as I call it, the COVID con. And it's not the first con job perpetrated on the public. I wish I could say it would be the last con job, but I don't believe that's going to be true.
Right.
But, how we were conned medically, how we were conned scientifically, how we were conned with not providing accurate or proper treatments, and of course the financial con and the political con, that it was all bundled up into one big, bold lie that was wrapped up in a blanket of fear and unknowns that took a long time for people to uncover and see what was actually happening.
One of the questions Senator Johnson asked you was about Trudeau. Does he still have popular support?
As you know, for those who watched that hearing, his best before date has been long past, and I don't believe he'll make it to the gate in the next race, the next electoral cycle. I'm sure that the Liberals will see that their fortunes are not going to be carried very far on Trudeau's coattails, so they'll walk him out into the wilderness one night and put another figurehead in charge of the party.
Right. And then what's your best guess of who they might push forward? I have a couple people in mind, but
well, I think the party insiders certainly are going to, in all likelihood, select Carney unless some other more attractive puppy can be found to put in the electoral window to distract people. But that's many people don't realize that the leader of the party has little influence in the direction of the party or the legislative agenda of the party.
and you've also got quite a long list of charges against you because of your opposition, organizing protests, and not doing what you're supposed to do. You got, that's 26 charges.
I had 25 charges originally for having no more lockdown rallies across the province. I'm down to 5 of those. 20 of them have been withdrawn, and they're substantial charges. They're not criminal, but those ones come with a maximum fine of $100,000 a piece and up to a year in jail.
Ouch.
And then I have the 9 criminal offenses for what I didn't do in Ottawa during February of 2022.
Right.
The Crown is seeking a 3.5-year prison sentence for me for encouraging people to come to the nation's capital. And apparently, I'm facing a bunch of trumped up, fictitious charges, but the Crown has proceeded by way of indictment. And I have a jury trial scheduled for a year from now. But I've seen the evidence, and I can tell your audience the evidence that they have against me, much of it is fabricated and fraudulent, and I am confident during the course of the judicial pretrials, it will become known to everyone that the Crown and the Ottawa Police Services were engaged in an abusive process and a malicious prosecution against me.
Okay, so one of the main charges is that you assaulted a police officer, and there's a 24-second clip of you and Max Bernier on the steps in front of the Parliament building. So what's going on in that clip? Because it's a little bit confusing.
Well, you can see it was a very significant pinch point. The Parliamentary Protective Services had cordoned off and had created a pinch point where everybody had to go through a single gate to get on Parliament Hill, and there was tens of thousands of people there, and many wanted to get on the hill. So it was very congested, very jostling, and I moved one of the temporary barricades away to try to alleviate the pinch point.
Let's go! Go! Let's go! Go!
And for that moving of the barricade, charged with assault of a peace officer and obstruction of 2 peace officers. And indeed, just to give you an example how abusive the Crown can be, at my bail hearing, where no evidence is actually produced at a bail hearing, it's just the reiteration by the Crown and the defense, but the Crown attorney, Tim Whiteman, described to the judge that I picked up a heavy steel barricade and threw it at the police officers. Now, anybody watching that video, and I can tell you with 100% certainty, because that video is included in the disclosure to me, that is the only evidence that the Ottawa Police Services have to substantiate the charge of assault and obstruction against.
Right, which based on the video is
yeah,
pretty
based on the video and how the Crown is willing to fabricate a false narrative in their reports. They did it in Ottawa. Our Prime Minister did it in Ottawa with a false narrative of the bouncy castles and the road hockey games and the saunas on Wellington Street. The Crown is willing to continue with those fabrications in the court of law, but we'll catch them up. And
yeah, you made one statement in the your testimony that about the events on Ottawa. They were a very happy, joyous time. One of the happiest, I think, was what your comment.
Well, I've been around for 66 years, Rick. I grew up in Ottawa. I have never seen any city or any community in Canada be so full of joy and happiness and euphoria and exuberance at any time, anywhere in my lifetime. It was, of strangers hugging each other. The Quebecois were chanting liberté as the Anglais were chanting freedom. And it was, there was absolutely no violence. There was no animus. There was no hostilities. It was quite the opposite. And, Justin Trudeau lied to the people of Canada. His cabinet ministers lied to the people of Canada. And indeed, as we can see in the Mosley decision just recently, they've lied to the courts as well, but the courts have ruled that there was never any threat to the security of the nation. There was never any threat of violence, and that the invoking of the Emergency Measures Act was ultra vires, that was without authority, and it was unconstitutional.
Right. Now there's, Tamara Leach and Chris Barber and Ed Cornell and Vincent Guerzay launched two separate lawsuits 3 weeks later. So hopefully this is opening the door to, some legal action.
The big bold lie will get unraveled, and we will see the truth someday. But it's still going to take a little bit of time yet. This was the boldest lie and the boldest con and the boldest cover-up in human history.
Yeah, 100% it was, yeah.
It's not going to come undone. There's a lot of people that want to keep those covers and those lies under wraps. The Coots 4 are another good example. Fabrications, falsehoods, and using the legal system to take away people's freedoms instead of shielding and protecting their freedoms.
Right. There's speaking of the sergeant in arms. There's one clip I saw of you being confronted by this. I guess it was a sergeant in arms, the lady at the door saying, "You cannot pass."
That's right.
Yeah, and you went anyway. You told her what the rules were, and went in anyway. And so this was must have been 2021.
The house, you are required to wear a tightly woven
I am
mask
unable
around.
to make accommodations for me. I am unable to.
You have to go through the speaker to make
I've
accommodations.
sent a letter to the speaker. The accommodation must be permitted, or else you are obstructing and in contempt of the legislature. Even the Speaker cannot be in contempt of the legislature.
So if you fail to wear this mask, you'll be required to report it to the House.
Okay. Put me down for a name.
We all good?
That was 2021. The legislature had introduced a mandatory mask mandate that you had to have a mask on to be in the chambers. You were allowed to bring it down under your chin while you were speaking or having a glass of water. But at all other times, you were supposed to have it on your mug. And the other part of that rule was when you went in to actually vote, they said you had to wear the mask as well. And I just told the Sergeant at Arms, no way, I'm going in to vote. I didn't wear a mask in the Legislative Assembly. I wasn't going to play their games and buy into their falsehoods or promote their falsehoods. And then I went in to vote. And I did it on 3 occasions that day. And every time, the Speaker, the Sergeant at Arms, would go back and tell the Speaker that I had violated the rule.
Right.
And then we'd go back into the legislature, and the Speaker would say, Mr. Hillier, you're the member for Lanark, you've been a bad boy. There's always been somebody wanting to sell a con job, Rick. The ozone hole, the acid rain, the population bomb, the killer bees, like the Y2K. Like, I can't remember all of the apocalyptic con jobs that I've heard in my lifetime. And none of them were true. And none of them are true. But it all allowed governments to take more and more money from the middle class. It facilitated the control, ever greater controls on people, and we've got some really bad con jobs coming our way under the guise of convenience and fear, the pandemic treaty, etc.
You mentioned something about the city on the hill in your talk.
250 years ago, the people in the American colonies rose up against the tyranny of what they called the intolerable acts or the coercive acts. We've got a whole lot of coercive, intolerable acts coming. Chinese social credit, CBDCs, biodigital convergence, AI. The list is endless. What we did in Ottawa in 2022, we demonstrated that we could fight against those intolerable and coercive acts, and they can be defeated. Because every time we honked the horn in Ottawa, the science changed in Ottawa. Every time we honked the horn in Ottawa, the science changed around the world. We've all, throughout history, have faced evil. But it's always been the righteous and the faithful, once mobilized and motivated, that have always defeated evil and have built a new city upon the hill. I believe that I'm sitting with those new sons and daughters of liberty who will make this new city upon the hill. Thank you very much.
Well, you have to have hope. As I said, described with that city on the hill, those early American settlers, first off, they left a very oppressive old world, and they built. Eventually, they built their city upon the hill, and it was a beacon for freedom and justice and liberty. But it was it didn't come easy. Even when they thought they could flee the oppression of the homeland of the old world, soon enough they were facing oppression once again, and they used those terms to see the coercive and the intolerable acts of Great Britain, and they did something about it. And that's really what I'm hopeful of, and I know it will happen. That people in Canada will do something about it. They will not just go silently down this dark path that the government has opened the door for us to travel on.
Well, I think you're right, and I think we saw there's something in the Canadian character that was unexpected. In the whole year at all the rallies here in Vancouver before the truckers went to Ottawa, everyone was saying Canadians are lame. We're so lame. I heard that so many times at rallies. Oh my God, Canadians are so complacent, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly, kaboom, exploded. And suddenly we weren't complacent anymore. Suddenly the whole world was watching and everybody was imitating us. And, there Dutch farmers were putting up Canadian flags at their protests. So, yeah.
Yeah, but listen, anybody who says that Canadians are lame, what they're actually saying is they're lame.
Right. Good point. Right.
That's that they're too lazy to get up.
They're too lazy. Right.
Well, most people want to be left alone and live their life peacefully and with industry and in the manner that they believe is the correct way for them to live, right? But when others or government then start to infringe on that, and you can't achieve those ends, or being frustrated and obstructed from doing it, well, that's when people do get motivated. That's when people do get mobilized, and that's what we saw in Ottawa in February 2022. What's happened since 2020? We've reawakened people's understanding of the value of faith and the value of a society that has a foundation. In Canada, we have a Christian foundation. Over my lifetime, we've seen a great disregard for Christianity, a great disregard for faith, and this embrace of secularism and actually derision.
Disrespect for Christianity and all religions.
And with it has come this disrespect for the dignity of man and for life itself. And so I think, that gives me great hope and optimism as well, that people are waking up and understanding that if you want to live in a good society, a peaceful, prosperous, free society, the only way that we've ever known this to be accomplished so far in the history of man is in a society that's founded on Christian values.
Well, the history of the West has been a mixed bag. Though I agree with this, our civil rights and freedoms came from Christianity. Okay, well, thanks a lot for joining us and having this chat, Randy. Really appreciate it. And I would like to close by saying I echo Pastor Hildebrand's words that we're all very proud of you for you were so articulate in your words in Washington. You represented Canada and just, the freedom communities so well. So thank you for what you did and what you are doing. Thank you. Thank you.
Very kind and generous words, Rick.
Okay, Randy.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, me too. Likewise.
Our work is entirely reader-supported. If you enjoyed this article, please consider sharing it with like-minded people. Upgrade your subscription to paid or buy us a coffee at paypal.me/freepolitic. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Rumble, BitChute, TikTok, or YouTube. If you want to read more, you can buy one of Rick Thompson's books. The best way to keep up to date with what we're doing is subscribe to the mailing list at victorycanada.today, which will get you an email notification for our social activism, and on Substack whenever we post another article. All works are narrated by MB Bose. Thank you for your continued support and encouragement.